The preceding case studies of American secessionist and autonomy movements reveal a complex interplay of historical grievances, political identity, economic considerations, and legal constraints. Each case, whether the Confederacy's attempt at independence, Texas's ongoing nationalist rhetoric, or Key West's humorous but telling protest, illustrates different facets of the broader conversation about governance and self-determination in the United States. While the United States is often seen as a stable and unified entity, these case studies challenge that perception. They expose long-standing fractures in the Union and suggest that political cohesion is not as permanent as many assume. By analyzing these movements collectively, we can identify common themes, legal and structural obstacles, and possible pathways forward for a nation grappling with deep political and cultural divisions. This chapter synthesizes the lessons from these diverse movements, focusing on three major areas. 1. Common themes that drive separatist or autonomy-seeking sentiments. 2. Legal and constitutional barriers to secession or reorganization. And 3. Political and economic realities that influence the feasibility of such efforts. Through this analysis, we aim to shed light on whether the American Republic, as currently structured, can adequately address the grievances that fuel these movements, or whether a new constitutional framework may be necessary to ensure long-term stability and unity. Common themes in secession and autonomy movements. Political alienation and representation. One of the most consistent themes across the case studies is the feeling of political alienation. Many movements arise from a belief that the federal government is unresponsive or actively hostile to the interests of a particular region or group. This sense of disenfranchisement is particularly evident in the South's post-Reconstruction resentment toward federal authority, Texas nationalist movements that argue for greater state sovereignty, California's urban-rural divide, and proposals to split into multiple states. Puerto Rico's status as a U.S. territory without full representation. D.C.'s continued lack of congressional voting rights despite its large population. In each of these cases, dissatisfaction with political representation is a driving force behind separatist or autonomy-seeking sentiments. These movements highlight the weaknesses of the existing federal structure in accommodating regional and demographic differences. Economic disparities and resource control. Economic factors play a crucial role in many of these movements. The perception that a region is being unfairly taxed, exploited for its resources, or economically disadvantaged by federal policies often fuels calls for greater autonomy or outright secession. This is evident in Alaska's frustrations over federal land control and restrictions on resource extraction, Puerto Rico's economic struggles under territorial status and federal financial oversight, Texas's belief in its economic self-sufficiency as an oil-rich state, California's division proposals, which often stem from concerns over tax distribution and economic imbalance between urban and rural areas. Movements for autonomy frequently emerge in regions that either feel exploited by the central government or believe they would thrive economically if independent. However, economic realities often complicate these arguments, as many of these regions rely heavily on federal funding and would face significant financial hurdles if they separated from the Union. Cultural and historical identity. Another key factor driving these movements is cultural and historical identity. Many of these regions view themselves as distinct from the broader national identity, often citing historical legacies, linguistic differences, or unique political traditions. Examples include the South's lost cause narrative and lingering Confederate identity, Hawaii's indigenous sovereignty movement, rooted in the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom, the Conch Republic identity of Key West, which emphasizes local uniqueness and independence. Cultural identity can serve as both a unifying force and a justification for political separation. However, in a multicultural and multi-ethnic nation like the United States, it also raises questions about the limits of nationalism within a federal system. Legal and constitutional barriers. The Supreme Court and the indestructibility of the Union. The legal framework of the United States presents significant obstacles to secession or fundamental political restructuring. The most notable legal precedent is Texas versus White, 1869, in which the Supreme Court ruled that states do not have the right to unilaterally secede. This decision reinforced the idea that the Union is perpetual and that any attempt at secession would require congressional approval. This ruling has major implications for modern movements. Texas's Texit movement lacks legal grounding and would require an act of Congress. California's state-splitting proposals face constitutional hurdles due to Article 4, Section 3, which requires congressional consent for new states. Puerto Rico's political status can only be changed through federal legislation or constitutional amendments. While legal challenges do not necessarily invalidate separatist sentiments, they place significant roadblocks in the way of any region seeking independence or greater autonomy. The role of Article 5 and constitutional amendments. One potential mechanism for addressing regional grievances is through constitutional amendments. Article 5 provides a path for structural change, either through congressional action or a constitutional convention. However, the amendment process is notoriously difficult, requiring either a two-thirds majority in both the House and Senate and ratification by three-fourths of the states, a constitutional convention called by two-thirds of state legislatures, with any proposed changes also requiring three-fourths ratification. Given the polarization of modern American politics, achieving consensus on any significant constitutional reform is a formidable challenge. Nonetheless, this route remains the most legally viable option for addressing structural grievances. Political and economic realities, federal dependence, and the cost of independence. Despite secessionist rhetoric, most regions considering independence or greater autonomy are deeply reliant on federal funding. Many states and territories receive substantial federal aid for infrastructure, healthcare, disaster relief, and economic subsidies. The economic costs of independence are often underestimated in separatist movements. For instance, Alaska's economy benefits from federal military bases and energy subsidies. Puerto Rico relies on billions in federal aid for healthcare, education, and disaster recovery. States like Texas and California, despite their economic power, would face trade and defense challenges if independent. Separatist movements often emphasize economic grievances, but fail to account for the complexities of financial interdependence within the Union. The role of national and global politics. Any attempt at secession or major political restructuring would have significant national and global implications. The United States plays a dominant role in international trade, military alliances, and global governance. A fractured U.S. would disrupt these structures, creating economic uncertainty and diplomatic instability. Moreover, national politics play a crucial role in determining whether separatist movements gain traction. Political polarization, demographic shifts, and economic trends will all influence whether the U.S. moves toward greater unity or further division in the coming decades. Conclusion: toward a new constitutional framework? The case studies examined in this book suggest that while secession remains legally improbable, the underlying grievances that drive these movements are real and require attention. The United States faces a critical question. Can the current constitutional framework accommodate the diverse and evolving needs of its regions, or is a more fundamental restructuring necessary? Potential reforms could include greater regional autonomy through state compacts or revised federalism models, a more flexible amendment process to allow for structural changes without full constitutional conventions, enhanced representation for territories like Puerto Rico and D.C. to address long-standing disenfranchisement. Ultimately, the future of the Union depends on its ability to adapt. Whether through constitutional reform, regional governance adjustments, or renewed national dialogue, addressing the concerns of secessionist and autonomy movements will be crucial in maintaining a stable and functional republic. If these grievances continue to be ignored, the fractures in the Union may only deepen, forcing a reckoning that the Founding Fathers never anticipated, but that the modern era can no longer avoid.